Welcome to Bike On CCP-TV, the Emmy-nominated education channel of Community College of Philadelphia. Bike On is a program about bicycling and bicycle-related issues in and around Philadelphia. I'm Walt Johnson, and this is my co-host, Chuck Herbert. Chuck teaches computer science here at Community College of Philadelphia. He's active as both a road cyclist and a commuter, cycling about 150 miles a week. He's a board member of the Bicycle Club of Philadelphia and currently serves as the club's vice president. And he's chair for their big event, the Scenic Schuylkill Century, held every September.
Hi, Walt. Walt's retired now, but he taught computer information systems at Community College of Philadelphia and worked for many years as a systems engineer for IBM. He happens to be an avid cyclist. In 1976, he rode from Oregon to Virginia as part of Bike Centennial, which grew to become the Adventure Cycling Association that we have today. He rode 70 miles for his 70th birthday and completed an 80-kilometer ride for his 80th birthday. Over the years, he's been seen on a classic Peugeot, a custom-built Bill Boston original, a folding Brompton bike, a Cannondale tandem, and his current favorite, a red Cannondale road bike.
Last year, Chuck and a production crew from CCP-TV visited Wissahickon Cyclery in Chestnut Hill. It's one of many wonderful local bike shops we're fortunate enough to have here in Philadelphia. We'll start today's program with Chuck's interview with Sam Ebert, who was Wissahickon's shop manager at the time of our visit.
Hello, Sam.
Hey, Chuck.
I have a set of questions I'd like to ask you. We ask all of our guests, and the first item on the list is, tell us about your favorite bike.
My favorite bike is probably the one that my boss made for me. It is a custom frame with the geometry set according to my natural physique and anatomy. It is a road bike that can accept larger diameter tires, and it has disc brakes and very large chainstays for stiffness. So it rides extremely sprightly, but at the same time can take a beating on the trail.
And I heard that this bike has 1-inch chainstays.
1 inch, yes. So Drew is doing something pretty remarkable in that he is creating a extremely large diameter chainstay, which improves stiffness and ride quality, but at the same time can leave ample clearance for larger tires without dimpling the chainstay, which would any kind of a dimple or dent in any round tube will cause a weak point. So the fact that he does that through bending is pretty miraculous.
For those of you that might not be familiar with it, the chainstay is the part of the bicycle frame, the tube, that connects the place where you pedal to the back wheel, and the chain goes along next to it. That's why it's called the chainstay. And what Sam is telling us is that his is 1 inch in diameter, and it's made from titanium. So that sounds like a pretty substantial bike. I guess it can take quite a bit of abuse.
It is. It's an incredible ride and does exactly what I need it to, which is explore the countryside and in looking for new mountain bike trails, and at the same time I can go enjoy a long road ride with my friends.
So you have a road bike that's also built with the tires and designed so that it can handle rugged terrain as well.
Exactly, yep.
And I guess you cycle quite a bit in the Wissahickon.
I do. The Wissahickon takes a little bit of me as well, but I live for trail riding.
Okay, good. Next thing I'd like to ask you about is your favorite biking event. Is there a biking event that you can tell us about, or one you can think of that you are really interested in?
I'm very interested in an event I will be doing this coming July. It's called Tour de Berg, which is a playoff of course, Tour de France. But it is in Harrisonburg, Virginia, along the Shenandoah Mountain Ridge. It is a 5-day stage race encompassing somewhere between 400 to 500 miles, and most of the stages are on the mountain bike and are climbing.
And this is the first time that you've been in that event?
It will be my first time there. We will see how it goes. It's also the, I believe, 20th anniversary of the ride.
Oh, that's interesting. Where do you like to ride around here? You mentioned the Wissahickon. Tell us about some of the places in the Philadelphia area that you like to ride.
I do love the Wissahickon, but I must say that my favorite place would be Belmont Plateau. It is a local spot that is extremely technical, so it limits traffic, and is a really good place to sort of zone out on my bike and work on technique and really get some great exposure to something that only the Northeast really has in terms of terrain, which is roots and rocks and short, punchy little climbs.
So you're riding on the Belmont Plateau off-road.
Yes, yes. So it is single track maintained by the Belmont Plateau Trails Alliance, which is, I should say, championed by two individuals mainly, Mark Elsasser and Ed Bush. They do a great job making it all happen. There's also Big Walt out there every day trimming the trails and making everything nice and rideable. Yeah, it's a really fantastic sort of local thing we have. Everyone can ride the Wissahickon, but it takes really getting into the mountain biking scene to enjoy the plateau.
Now, I've heard you and a few other people talk about wet trails. Tell us what you think about wet trails.
Wet trails, that is, there's nothing like riding your bike through the mud. It's very fun. It feels very tough, but it is extremely detrimental to the experience of others and the ecosystems that the Wissahickon promotes. For one, every time you ride a rut in a trail, it typically widens and causes more erosion. Then, given the fact that it's February, should we get a cold night and that rut freezes, another rider can come along and break the crests of the rut, which will only be washed away during the thaw. So
it's not a good idea to ride on the trails when it's wet?
It is not. No, it is not a good idea. We understand, everyone has to sometimes get from point A to point B. Take that with a grain of salt. But for the most part, the Friends of the Wissahickon do a great job of maintaining the trails out there, and it is our duty as members of the same community and users of the same trails to do our part. They're very kind to let us mountain bike there, and it's also important to remember that in any major trail system where mountain biking is prohibited, it is typically a result of arguments over trail erosion.
So besides riding on the trails when they're wet, riding on the trails in the springtime when they're just beginning to thaw out sounds like it might not be such a good idea either.
Right. You can actually have better luck riding in freezing temperatures in the winter than you would in the rainier parts of March and April, and of course the parts where it's thawing, simply due to the fact that the trails really soak up a lot of water, and in addition to that, don't really dry very well because of the tree coverage.
Okay, good. I'd like you to tell us about your best experience biking. What's one of the best experiences you've had on a bike?
I would probably say the first time I did an event called Wissahickon Hundo. That is a Gran Fondo or a gravel event hosted by a good friend, Pat Engelman. He is a local supporter of cycling. He is a cyclist. He is also a driving force in, I'm going to butcher the acronym here, but the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Mountain Bike Racing League. So he is bringing mountain bike racing to high schools and elementary schoolgoers throughout Pennsylvania, which is cool because we have such a great state for mountain bike riding, and I certainly wish I was exposed to it at a younger level. And he holds a race called Wissahickon Hundo, and it is essentially a lap around Scranton, Pennsylvania. And it's all of his childhood roads, and it is just such a blast. And the Hundo stands for 100 miles. And a lot of my friends do it. There's a taco stop about 50 miles in, which can be a pro or a con, but it's an incredible event.
So you told us about your best experience on a bike. Tell us about one of your worst experiences on the bike.
Sure thing. So I wouldn't advocate texting while driving, and I also wouldn't advocate pulling your cell phone out while riding your bike, because I was once doing just that on Forbidden Drive, which is a large gravel road, and I noticed a little too late that I had a big pile of horse manure under my front wheel. And in a last-ditch effort, I attempted to bunny hop it with only one hand on the handlebars because of my silly cell phone, and immediately went sideways in the air and landed hip first in the horse manure and cut myself up all over my body. I still have a big scar on my shoulder from it. Destroyed my cycling kit that I was wearing, damaged my bike. Definitely one of the least expected worst days on my bicycle.
It sounds like it. I haven't had that experience. I've had to avoid horse manure on Forbidden Drive, but I've never ended up in the horse manure on Forbidden Drive.
Yep.
You know any good bicycle jokes?
I do. It actually relates very much to the story I just told you. Do you know what the hardest thing about bicycling is?
No, Sam. What's the hardest thing about bicycling?
The pavement.
What cyclist do you admire most? Are there one or two bicyclists whom you really admire?
There are. I really admire a local ex-pro and still local legend, Harlan Price. He also happens to be my landlord, coincidence. He is a exceptional bike rider, a great person, extremely helpful. He actually trains athletes now for a living, anyone from beginners to extremely experienced people through his company Take Aim Cycling, and I highly encourage the use of his clinics. They're very beneficial to anyone who wants to get better on a mountain bike. And then I would say my other big influence would have to be Nairo Quintana from Colombia. He is a road cyclist, but he came from nothing. He rode a dingy old mountain bike up and down a huge Colombian mountain every day for school. And next thing you know, he is top 3 finisher 2 years in a row in the Tour de France, right behind Chris Froome. He's all heart. He's a super tiny little guy, not showy, doesn't really have any of that European flair when it comes to road cycling. And I want to see him in yellow this coming year, and let's hope it happens because Sky doesn't need any more yellow jerseys.
He actually did pretty well in the recent Tour de France, didn't he?
He did. He always shows very strongly on the climbs, and compared to Chris Froome's weird elbow out style of riding, he just is such a motor up the hills. So this year's course was more hill-centric, and it really benefited him.
But I think he's a little more muscular and, how can we say, compact than Chris Froome is.
I would agree. He's not the biggest guy.
And he was the polka dot jersey, the king of the mountain for a while?
I believe he was, yeah. He definitely was 2 years ago. This most recent one, he may have been green jersey, unless I went to Peter Sagan.
So Sam, do you always ride a helmet when you're on your bike?
Always. I don't even like to go down to the corner store on my street without a helmet. My current helmet needs replacement. Actually, it has a big dent in it, and that would have been a very bad crash without one. And I have several friends who have broken several helmets, and I highly recommend the use of them.
Well, I hear that Wissahickon Cyclery has a good selection.
We do have a good selection. We have something called MIPS that I support wholeheartedly. It is a technology that mimics the rotation of your brain within your cranium and sort of reverses that. So in effect, it negates the chance of concussion during crashing by cradling your cranium within the helmet, and it is supposedly very effective, and concussions are only getting more and more realized to be the demons that they are. So,
well, as I understand it, when people crash with a traditional bicycle helmet, there's a possibility that the helmet can catch on something. Mm-hmm. And you have neck injuries because your head doesn't move.
Yeah.
With the MIPS helmet, your skull can rotate inside the helmet.
Exactly. It has this membrane that is separate from the exterior shell of the helmet, so any sudden jerking motion is negated.
Right. So besides the concussions, it also helps prevent neck injuries. But the concussions,
Indeed.
as I understand it, occur because your head moves back and forth quickly or swivels quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain keeps moving when your skull stops.
Yeah, I think with cyclists they have realized lately that they're usually torsional concussions at this point, so it is your brain quickly turning within your cranium that is causing them, whereas with football or more impact-oriented sports, it would be anything that is direct impact. So MIPS is meant to counteract the twisting and turning of the brain within the cranium.
Sounds good. How did you get started in bicycling?
My brother-in-law, Mike, gave me a bike in, I guess it was 8th grade, and it was a single speed. Then one day I realized that there was a second cog on the other side of the wheel on the single speed, and it didn't coast or freewheel. And I looked it up, and I found out what a fixed gear was, and then I found out that all these cool-looking kids were riding them everywhere. So I immediately became a bike kid by virtue of this really, unbeknownst to me, this really cool single-speed fixed gear bike that I had received from my brother-in-law. And I actually ended up selling it and have regretted it ever since. So when I graduated from college, my present to myself was buying the same frame again in my new size. So
With different gears.
yes, a bigger ratio now. Yeah.
What's your favorite bicycle accessory?
My favorite bicycle accessory,
Other than a helmet, of course.
other than a helmet. You know, I eat a lot, and I'd have to say it is whatever food I bring with me on my ride.
I see.
I have a lot of tricks that I've come up with because I'm the kind of guy who gets very hangry, and it's important for me to sustain calories while I'm riding my bike, and I like to have a little bit of fun with it. So I'll do, 2 waffles with peanut butter, honey, Nutella, and banana in between them. Or over here in the shop, we actually sell shots of pure maple syrup. So anything to kind of get that blood sugar to spike and sustain. There's all sorts of ways you can go about it, and there's great cookbooks out there for it as well.
So your favorite bicycle accessory is the food that you bring
I
with
would
you.
say so. I'm a foodie. Yep.
We talked about helmets a few minutes ago. Do you think everyone should wear a helmet? And what do you think about bicycle helmet laws?
I think everyone should wear a bicycle helmet. I really do. I understand they don't always look the coolest, and in some circumstances, I have actually had clearance problems with a helmet where I'm trying to duck something, and you're only used to having to clear this much space, and then the helmet is, of course, adding 1.5 to 2.5 inches, so you can snag on something there, and that's of course problematic. But the alternative is, a dent in your helmet will always look a lot better than a dent in your head. As for bicycle helmet laws, I think everyone should have the right to make their own decision, but I would really like it if in other areas, information and more promoted understanding of the risks was made available. It trickles down from the NFL, it trickles down from the NHL. Our understanding of the severity of head trauma is not something that is widely recognized. And I don't think necessarily that, if you're over or under a certain age, you should have to wear a helmet. But I do think we can all do a better job at educating ourselves about the true dangers of head injury.
So when you go out on your bike, you're wearing your helmet,
Mm-hmm.
you're taking some food, sometimes stuff you created yourself,
Yep.
sometimes shots of maple syrup.
Indeed, yep.
What other accessories do you take with you? What do you typically take with you when you go out on a ride? I guess it depends on what kind of ride, but give us a general idea.
So regardless of what bike I'm on, I'll always bring a spare tube, CO2 to quickly inflate my tires, the inflator that works with the CO2 charge. I typically bring a single tire lever. I will bring my phone nowadays for data tracking. It syncs with my heart rate monitor. And other than that, I like to pack a little light. I've heard of people landing on their gear in their back jersey pockets and being hurt. And I also don't like it sort of flying around when I'm riding, throwing me off balance. But for the most part, I pack light, a few water bottles, and maybe a little bit of supplement in the water, Scratch Labs, which is a fancier Gatorade powder, essentially, and of course the food. Yeah.
Well, I put my food in the back pockets and actually pads me if I fall off and land on them
Yeah.
instead of hard equipment in there. What's the farthest you've ridden on your bike?
Farthest I've ridden is probably in the ballpark of 140 miles in a single ride.
140 miles on a single ride. What about a multi-day ride?
A multi-day, I haven't really done too much of that. Because if I'm doing anything multi-day lately, it would be mountain biking, and you would always be doing less volume, just by virtue of the terrain you're going over. is very exhausting. You can spend a day on your mountain bike and go 20 miles. If you spend a day on your road bike, you should probably be exceeding 50.
So you went 140 miles. That was on a road bike?
Yes.
And is that the toughest day you had biking, or was there a time on the mountain bike when you didn't go as far and it was more exhausting?
Yes, I've had a tougher day on the mountain bike doing 70 miles.
I see. So the terrain really does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think about the materials that bicycles are made from? Carbon, steel, aluminum, titanium? What do you say about that?
Well, I think that every material still has its place in the cycling world. Here at Wissahickon, we have a bit of a bias towards titanium, but it is rooted strictly in experience and technical qualities of the material. But I ride a carbon bike. I had a few aluminum bikes. I've had many steel bikes. And thanks to Drew, I have some really cool titanium bikes. Like I said, they all have their virtues. They all have their pros and cons. And they certainly all have their ride characteristic. Carbon can be modified and manufactured in such a way that it can be one bike frame is a single piece. That's pretty astounding that you could have one part that encompass every single affixment on the bike. And steel, aluminum, and titanium for the most part rely on tube-to-tube construction. So they need to be welded. By virtue of the fact that they need to be welded, there are stress points. So it goes both ways. Some people would say that carbon bikes are the best things that ever happened to titanium bikes, though, because titanium bikes are of similar weight, stiffness, ride quality, and at the same time offer better dent resistance and are really actually stronger in any sort of crash situation. Carbon can be a little finicky in the cold from singular pointed impact. It's still a fantastic material, but it has some more to go.
So titanium is much more durable than carbon. You might have a titanium bike for 10 or 20 years.
Exactly.
Carbon generally tends not to last so long.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, Sam.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Chuck.
Wissahickon is unique because the shop's owner, Drew Gudalian, is also a bike builder. His Engine Cycles workshop is at the same location. He's best known for his cyclocross and mountain bikes. Sam showed us a custom cyclocross bike and an off-the-shelf mountain bike from Scott Bikes.
Sam, we have a couple of interesting bikes here. You want to tell us about these bikes?
Sure thing. I'll start with the top one. This is a bike owned by local pro Carolyn Popovich, and she actually has two of these. Each one was made by Drew, so they are the exact same frame geometry. This one employs rim brakes for dry conditions, and the other one employs disc brakes for wet, muddy conditions. The reason rim brakes are desirable in dry conditions is because they're way lighter. So she, depending on what kind of race she'll be entering, these are cyclocross bikes, so she does cyclocross racing. Depending on what the weather is that day, what the terrain is, she may switch bikes during the race in the pit, or she may rely solely on one for the entire event. This bike below us here, this is a Scott Genius. So this is what you would call, it is a mountain bike, but within the disciplines of mountain biking, you would call this a trail bike. So what I mean by trail bike is that it has a lot of travel. You can see here that it has a front suspension fork with 150 millimeters of travel. And back here, you can see another little, what we would call air can, another shock, and suspension pivots, and then swing arm linkage. So this whole rear end actually has suspension to it. And that adds quite a bit of weight, but also allows this bike's rear end to travel 150 millimeters as well as the front. So this bike is really ready for some pretty rough descents and the occasional mistake that would otherwise derail your pleasant mountain bike ride.
So when a bike has suspension like this, which is independent, like a soft tail,
Yes.
that's to keep the wheel in contact with the ground rather than to bounce. Is that correct?
Exactly. Despite random viral videos on the internet, the Full suspension mountain bike is actually intended to keep you on the ground instead of soaring through the air.
And you'd mentioned the brakes. We see the rim brakes here. This bike has disc brakes.
Yes, so these are actually hydraulic disc brakes. They're the nicest ones you can buy on the market. There is no stronger, more confident braking feeling than with a hydraulic brake. And that works by actuating a lever over here, which pumps fluid to two pistons. Some brakes have even more. And they clamp down on the rotor right there.
We have a rotor here in the back wheel, and we also have one in the front wheel.
Yep.
So Sam, I noticed that this bike has a straight set of handlebars. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, so mountain bikes, traditionally speaking, have what you would call a flat or riser bar. And that has to do with this shape, where it is perpendicular to the frame, the alignment of the bike frame. They're wider typically, and they only offer a slight range of hand positioning, but are still ergonomic. The reason being, on a mountain bike, leverage is extremely important. And what we'd like to see with a mountain bike is that the rider has ample ability to use their upper body as suspension.
I see. So the straight bars that are spread out a little bit more actually give the rider more control over the front wheel than the other kinds of bars.
Right.
And on the bike above, we have a different set of handlebars. Tell us about these bars and how they compare. These look a little more common. We see these quite a bit.
Yeah, so this is what is traditionally known as a drop bar. And it is seen mostly on cyclocross bikes and road bikes. And the major advantages to this are the variety of hand positions that are available to the rider. So you have the flats up here, which will let you handle the bike similar to a mountain bike's flat bar. Then you have the hoods, which would allow you to lean out, which is beneficial in climbing. And then the drops, which allow you to lean out and get low, which is an aerodynamic position and is also conducive of fast descents or sprints. So
the straight handlebars give you more control, whereas these bars allow you to drop down into a more aerodynamic position.
Right.
And the wind drag is an important factor when you're trying to go fast.
Exactly.
And here, the upper body strength can be used to control the bike a little more.
Right. And a bike like this that employs a dropper seat post, which can change heights, full suspension, bigger rubber, you're already looking at an increase in weight. Aerodynamics is not something that is really considered that important with mountain biking. On the road, on the cyclocross course even, you do see a little bit more of an aero understanding.
Not far from the two bikes that Sam just showed us, I noticed another interesting bicycle, one of the smallest I'd ever seen. I asked Sam to show us this children's bike and to tell us how it's different from an adult's bike.
This is a children's bike, pretty obvious given its size. What is interesting about it is the simplicity of it, really. So kids aren't, they don't have a lot of hand strength. They don't even have very big hands. So we left brake levers off of this bicycle. It instead relies on a coaster brake to stop the child from rolling away. And these bikes are particularly adjustable so that obviously when we're young, we're growing a lot. This will fit a range of sizes, probably someone from ages probably 2 till a little under 5, which is a pretty good range. And additionally, we do carry matching helmets for the children's bikes. Of course, this is a pink one. We have blue and other ones as well. What makes a kid's bike more a kid's bike than anything is actually the wheel diameter. So this is a 12-inch tire on a 12-inch rim. And what that allows for is very little energy needed to actually turn the wheel. So these bikes are actually quite zippy because they accelerate quickly, much like how on a motorcycle you'll see a smaller wheel than you will on, say, a car. They have a very good acceleration off the block. And this lends itself well to the lack of muscular development that children have. Despite the high caliber bikes I showed you earlier, Wissahickon Cyclery has a vast array of bikes available for purchase, and we also repair anything you can bring in. We cater to commuters, children's bikes, adults who only ride maybe even once a year, and of course the avid cyclist from beginner, weekend warrior, professional. So we can really get our hands on anything. And in terms of repair, Drew's frame building prowess really comes into play pretty frequently. We see a lot of stuck seat posts. We see some stuck bolts. We will see things that need to be threaded again or even milled down. And we are capable of doing all of that here by working so closely with engine cycles. I mentioned earlier a MIPS helmet, and we have one here on display. So you can actually see the yellow within the shell of this helmet. That is actually the MIPS protection system. It stands for Multi-Directional Impact Protection System. And I hope you can see it here, but it's able to modulate with my hand here. So when you can imagine tightening a helmet on your head, you're really tightening this inner membrane down, and the helmet floats freely. So in the event of snagging, the helmet will move without snagging your neck. And in the event of impact, the helmet will rotate to counteract the counter rotation that your brain is making within your cranium. So it's very cool technology. I highly recommend it, and you can never be too safe.
Those 3 bikes that Sham showed us at Wissahickon were certainly interesting, but they're not the most common bicycles seen on the streets and trails around Philadelphia. The most common are road bikes and commuter bikes. Here's a segment in our studio where Chuck and I look at 2 of those bikes, a road bike and a commuter bike, and see how they differ from one another.
This bike is a road bike. It's the kind of bike someone would ride if they're going out for 20, 30, 40 miles at a time, maybe riding with a bicycle club.
This bike, however, is a city bike, a bike that a person would buy if they were commuting or using it to go grocery shopping or do short runs around the city.
And one of the things that you can't really see when you look at the 2 bikes that's different between them is the weight. This bike has a carbon fiber frame, a carbon fiber composite frame, and it's very lightweight.
This one, however, is steel and probably weighs 30 pounds or more.
And one of the reasons that this bike can mount racks and this one can't is because of the material the bikes are made from. This is a carbon fiber composite bike. It's one of the latest in space-age materials for bicycles, along with titanium, and it's extremely light. When you're riding long distances, the weight can make a big difference. Whereas Walt's bike is a steel bike. And it has places on the bike where you can mount racks, as Walt said. This bike doesn't, because we don't want to mess up the carbon fiber. You can't really drill the carbon fiber. You compromise the material. One of the major differences between the 2 bikes are the handlebars. This bike has what we call drop bars. There's 3 positions where riders can put their hands when they're on a road bike. Up here, where the brake levers and shifting levers are called the hood. And we put our hands on the hoods on each side of the handlebar. We can use the brakes, we can use the shifting levers, we can ride comfortably bent over in a more aerodynamic position. Notice how these handlebars are lower than the bars on Walt's bike. The second position is to put your hands in the middle of the handlebars. Now, it doesn't seem like a big difference, but here, your wrists are turned, your thumbs are up. Here, your thumbs are inward, your wrists are in a more natural position. You can rest, you can move back and forth from one to the other, so in a long ride, you don't get fatigued as easily. And finally, they're called drop bars. These are the drops. You can put your hands down onto the drops, you're leaning over a bit more, a little more aerodynamic if it's windy or if you want to go fast.
However, this bike only has maybe 1 or 2 positions where you can have your hands. Right here on the grips. And notice there's special grips for that. You shift using controls right here, so your hands are still on the grips, and your brakes are right here. There might be times when you might want to change and put your hands on the ends of the bars, but that's probably rare.
And notice that Walt said that these bars shift differently. On the road bike, we have, actually it's hard to see because there's 2 levers here. There's a small lever that works by itself, and then the larger lever for the brakes is also a shift lever. One lever shifts down, one lever shifts up. We have shifts on each side because we have 2 different sets of derailleurs. In the back of the bike, we have a number of gears. This one happens to have 11 different gears, 11 different cogs on the back for the gear settings, and 2 cogs on the front. And on the right-hand side, This affects the back, the left-hand side affects the front.
The gear works basically the same way on this bike, with the gearing being the same for each hand. However, most people have heard about 10-speed bikes, and that was usually because the rear cluster had 5 gears and there were 2 in the front. This, however, has 3 in the front and probably 6 in the back, so it's basically an 18-speed bike, even though you probably would not use a couple of those gears, and the gears overlap anyway.
And again, keeping in mind the weight differences, this is what we call a compact double. It only has 2 cogs on the front in the crank where you pedal. You can also see that there's a difference in the pedals on the 2 bikes. These pedals, actually they're called clipless because there's a different kind called a clip, but there's a cleat on the pedal and there's a cleat on the bike shoes, and the cleat on the bike shoes clips into the pedal to hold your feet in position. Now that's good for road biking for a number of reasons. First of all, as you pull up on the pedal, you get a little bit of force as well as when you push down. But perhaps more importantly, if you're going to ride long distances, they help, the cleats and toe clips help to keep your feet in position. So your ankles, knees, and hips are all lined up square to the direction of motion, and it's less fatigue, less danger of injury, and so on your legs.
However, this bike only has platform pedals, the same on both sides, and you would ride them in sneaks. And notice I'm wearing sneaks now. I would not try to ride the bike that Chuck has with sneaks. This one, however, will work fairly well. And if you're just commuting, you probably want to ride in street shoes or in sneakers.
And there's a big difference in the cost of these 2 bikes as well, as you might imagine. This bike is actually a few years old. It was purchased for about $350, and it's typical of the first kind of bike someone would buy if they're an adult getting back into bicycling. And as Walt said, you can ride it with street shoes, street clothes. It's a commuter bike. This bike is intended for a little bit more serious use, and it's a little bit more expensive. Carbon bikes can cost anywhere from $1,000 up to several $1,000s. This one was about a $2,500 bike when it was brand new. Notice where the handlebars are in comparison to the seats as well. Here, the bars are lower than the seat. You're over a little bit more aerodynamic position. It's harder to ride that way. Your midsection has to be stronger, the core of your body. Whereas with this bike,
You're sitting up straight. You're probably not going a very far distance, probably to a grocery store or something close by, or maybe commuting to work. But I would not want to ride this bike more than 5 or maybe 10 miles in a day.
another difference between the 2 bikes are the brakes. This bike has disc brakes. There's a disc rotor on the front and back. I'll turn the bike around so you can see it. Here we have a rotor with calipers and a rotor with calipers on the front, very similar to the kind of disc brakes you'd see on an automobile. And the brake levers operate the calipers here, very different than what you'd see on what might be a more traditional bike.
This bike, however, has rim brakes, rubber bars that when you pull will adjust here and attach themselves to the rims. Very similar to a drum brake on a car as opposed to disc brakes on the modern cars.
The disc brakes on this bike are very good if you're going to ride your bike in wet weather. There are two reasons really to have disc brakes. One reason is because they're a lot easier on your hands. The pull to put the brakes on is not as much as the pull to put the brakes on rim brakes. But another difference, as Walt mentioned, has to do with the weather. If you're riding in wet weather and your tire gets wet, it's a lot less chance that there'll be an ice buildup or snow buildup or even water on the brake drums, on the brake rotors, as compared to the rims on the rim bike. If you take a look at the cables on Walt's bike compared to this bike, the cables here come into the frame. We have internally routed cables. There's a lot of different reasons for this. Some people think it's more aerodynamic. There's other reasons for it as well. But basically, the cables that go to the back components of the bike, both for shifting and for the brakes, are routed through the frame.
Here you see the cable outside the frame, and there are cable housings very similar to the ones on the bike that Chuck has. But notice here the cable comes outside the frame, and again, there's small cable housings at the end, but the cables do not go inside the tubes.
Even people that want to spend a lot of money on expensive bikes sometimes prefer to have the brakes externally routed as they are on that bike, because if you're out on the road and a cable snaps, you can do a quick repair yourself sometimes with the cable on the exterior. I guess that's happened to you a few times, Walt.
Well, if you're touring, you basically would be on a kind of combination of these 2 bikes. The bike that I toured on was aluminum, It had braze-ons so that you could mount racks and things like that. However, the cables were external, not like the bike that Chuck has, so that you can repair it if you happen to break a cable. If you broke a cable out on a 40 miles from nowhere in the middle of Kansas, you would have it be hard put to try to be able to adjust it with the bike that Chuck is riding.
Yeah, I had a cable snap in Valley Forge one day on this bike, and I couldn't fix it, so I had to come home in the highest gear, and I did fine till I got to Shawmut Avenue Hill, and I had to walk up about 1.5 miles because the gear was too high for me to ride on the hill. So if I had an external one, I might have been able, with the tools we have, to do something with the cable. Notice the difference in the packs. Walt's mentioned a couple of times that bike has braze-ons. These are the mounting points on the frame of the bike, so you can attach packs to the bike.
If I turn this around, you'll notice that there's also a side bag here. This one is designed mainly for carrying groceries. However, if you're touring, you also want those braze-ons, and you put on rear bags that were called panniers that actually could mount front and rear. One of the bikes I have has braze-ons on the fork actually, so that you can actually bolt panniers onto the front forks.
So this is commonly what we'd see on a bike that somebody's riding around in the city. They can go buy groceries. If I take this bike to school, I can carry my computer in that bag and my computer bag. And it's got what we call a trunk bag on the back, which holds quite a lot. This bike has an under saddle bag. Bicyclists call these saddles, not seats. And this is the under saddle bag because it mounts under the saddle. It clips on with a few straps. And believe it or not, you can get everything you need: a first aid kit, tire changing kit, an extra battery for your cell phone, a few other things inside a bag like this, and it's what you see on a lot of road bikes.
And don't forget to carry a spare tube when you're out on the road. But notice one other thing. This bike has something that a road rider is not going to find himself dead with, and there's a kickstand. I can leave this bike and put the kickstand down and leave it. Notice Chuck's bike, he has it in an external stand that happens to be something that you might put your bike in at home so you don't have to lean it against the wall and have your mate complain about you making dirty spots on the wall, as mine has complained.
There are some other differences in the bike that might be a little bit difficult for you to see. The tires are different. This has a thinner tire than this bike does. This has more of a tread on it. The trend today on newer bikes newer tires is to have a flat surface with a material that grips the road very well, whereas most city bikes will have a wider tire with a tread that's good for snow or in the water and so on.
The other thing that's also not obvious is that Chuck's bike tires probably carry 110, 115 pounds of pressure, where I would expect that a city bike might have maybe as much as 65, but rarely any more than that.
Both bikes do have braze-ons so that you can attach water bottle holders. It's common on almost all bikes today to be able to put something on both tubes here, and most people carry a pump with them. Sometimes people have what's called a CO2 inflator with carbon dioxide, little device you plug in and it instantly inflates the tire. But most people carry pumps with them. The pump mounts onto the same point here.
This bike also has the braze-ons. This one has a pump mount here as opposed to another water bottle. But if I were commuting on a bike, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I'd carry a couple of dollars in my pocket because in Philadelphia, at least, every bus has a bike rack on the front. And if I got a flat or something, I'd take a bus home, mount the bike on the rack on the front of the bus, and get home that way. I've only done that once, and that's because I got caught in the rain and there was a bus.
And you might be wondering about what this is up in the front here. This is made to hold a cell phone. If you're riding in the road bike, you can have your cell phone here, not to make phone calls, but because a lot of people, when they're out on a longer ride, will use the GPS system to see where they're going, look at the map or whatever, press it. Sometimes it talks and gives you directions. So this is a cell phone holder that's mounted on the front of the bike. We also have a headlight on this bike as well. There's a tail light. It's not on the bike at the moment. But if you're going to be out biking for any amount of time, you never know when you're going to get caught out in the dark. So it's always good to have a headlight and a tail light.
If you don't have a car, that's also an accessory you probably have on a city bike. If you're coming home after work in the wintertime, it's dark by 5 o'clock, and it would be great to have very bright lights on the bike so that you can be seen, not just little flashers, but really bright lights that other cars can see, both front and rear.
The shape of these two bikes might look the same, but that's a little bit misleading. This bike has a more compact geometry, front to back. It's shaped a little bit differently so that the position your legs are in and the position your seat is in when you're moving in relation to the handlebars It's designed for comfort for long distances. This is not a racing bike. Racing bike frames are made of the same material, but they have a different shape. This is a road bike. It's made for comfort for long distance rides. And under the seat, Walt, tell us about what's under the seat there.
I don't know what you're talking about right now. You're talking about the reflector here?
Right here, this.
Oh, it's a spring. I didn't even think of, this is not my bike. This is another one of Chuck's bikes. And this actually has some spring in it. I'm a road rider. I wouldn't even think about having that kind of spring on my bike, but there it is. However, I also have a tandem, and I have this on the rear of the tandem. And the reason for having it on the rear of the tandem is so that the stoker, the person who's riding on the rear, doesn't get hit by bumps if I don't tell her or him that there's a bump coming. The rider usually sees the bump and will lift off the saddle a little bit, but on the rear, if you don't warn that person and they get hit, then they'll start hitting you in the back of the head.
And the last thing we want to show you here before we finish is the quick release. On this bike, the quick release is on the left of the rider. On the front here, we have a lever that you can pull down and quickly take the front tire off. This bike, the quick releases are on the other side, and Walt will show you those.
Well, here it is. It's on the left side also. However, and the reason it's usually on the left side is because that's the side you usually put it on the rear, because on the right side, you have your cluster and your derailleur. So you put the quick release on the opposite side. So typically, most riders will have the quick release on the same side, on the left side.
So we can see the quick release is on the same side in both bikes. Here it is on the front of this bike, here it is on the back of this bike, and of course you can quickly take the tire off and change it when you need to do so. So that's it basically. These are two bikes, again, typical of the kind of bikes you'd see in Philadelphia or any other major city. Probably two of the most common kinds of bikes that we see in the United States today.
I'd like to mention one more though, Chuck, because I don't have a city bike like this. I have a folding bike.
Oh,
And the folding bike is very nice because even if you're working in an office, you can take the bike, fold it up, slide it under the desk. And I have a bike that folds up very small, and that way you can pick it up, carry it into your office, stick it under your desk.
I often commute to work on my bike, and it's about 10 miles downhill, and I see a person who rides 15 miles, and I always see him in the morning riding in on his folding bike, but I rarely see him going home on his folding bike because the folding bikes are easy to fold up and take on the bus or the trolley or even get a cab if you need to. And I think that's what he does. It's uphill on the way home, so I think he rides in the morning, folds his bike, and goes home at the end of the day with his folding bike folded up. I guess they're pretty good for when you're traveling too. And
It is.
does it fit on an airplane?
I have been told that there is a person that commutes, an attorney, who lives in Los Angeles on the weekends but goes to Vegas for his office. And Southwest Airlines has actually given him a letter so he can put his Brompton in the overhead rack.
Oh, wow.
on Southwest Airlines.
So that's it. There we have two bikes that are typical of the kind of bikes you'd see in Philadelphia today. Well, no matter what kind of bike you're riding, there are some common things that every bicyclist needs to be concerned about, such as tools for repairs, lights if you plan to ride at night, and so on. Bicycle accidents are not that common, but you should also think about carrying identification in case something goes wrong. Here's some scenes from our studio in which Walt and I talk about a few of these things. Let's talk for a moment about the kind of lights that someone might use on a bike. Now, a lot of people don't have lights on their bike because they're going to ride in the daytime, but you never know when you're going to get caught out in the dark or maybe in a storm when it's dark out. So lights are pretty important. Of course, they're important when you ride at night, but everybody should probably have a good set of bike lights. So let's take a look at some of the options. First of all, this is a $9 or $10 light that you would buy in a department store. You can also buy them in bike stores. They're battery powered. You press a button and they light up. There's a strap. They mount on the under seat tube, or they could mount on the handlebars. They come in red. They come in white light. They're not very bright. They're not very good. They're used as marker lights. They're better than nothing, but it's not really the kind of light that you should use if you expect to be out and going any distance in the dark on your bike. Again, it's a marker light. It's better than nothing. Here's a typical bicycle headlight. This one is 350 lumens. It has a strap that goes around the handlebar and snaps into place to hold the light in place. The light can be set to any angle you want off the handlebar. You just have to be careful not to point it in people's faces. Here's a similar light, The catch on this one's a little bit different. It snaps into place. And these fit on just about any kind of handlebars, both lights, because the straps are rubber, they're a little bit stretchy, and you can make them fit. Now in this light, you can see on top of it that it's got an indicator for the brightness of the light, the intensity. This is a 650 lumen light. This is a 350 lumen light. There's a little bit difference in the price. How bright should the lights be? Most people say that about 400 lumens is good if you're going to ride at night to really be seen and to see what's in front of you on the road. It's not just a marker light so that people can see you. It's a headlight so that when you're riding at night, you can see what's coming ahead of you. One of the biggest causes of injury to bicyclists is hitting obstacles on the road at night or hitting a pothole in a bad way at night. And these lights can make a difference because you can see what's coming. This light has different intensities. And it also flashes. Now, why would you want a flashing light? Some people think it's a bit obnoxious, but it's very common with bicycles. It distinguishes you if a car is at a distance from a motorcycle, but more importantly, when it flashes, the battery lasts twice as long. And that's a concern with lights. You don't want to have a light like this that's battery powered and have it run out after an hour on the road when you're out for 2 hours. So the 350 lumen light might actually be a better choice, or the 600 or 650 lumen light turned on the low intensity setting because the battery will last longer. These are USB rechargeable. This one has a little adapter in the back that folds out. This one actually has a USB socket on it, and you'd open it up and plug the USB cable into it. Here's a tail light. Tail lights are probably most important because if a car is approaching you from the back and you're riding on the right-hand side of the road, you're on the same side of the road as the car, and they may not be able to see you until it's too late. So a light like this that mounts onto the back of your bike, typically they have a strap and go underneath the seat on the seat post, is a really good idea. This one also happens to have side lights, so that if it's on the back of the bike, there's also some illumination from the side. And just like the headlights, it has different intensities, and you can set it to flash. I'm going to turn it off. You hold it for 2 seconds to turn it off. Now, when you buy a light like this, or a kit, this tail light and this headlight came together as a kit. When you buy a set like that, they often come with some other accessories. Here's a cable that you can use to plug the light in to any kind of a USB connector and charge the light. It just extends a little bit the distance from the adapter that's built into the light. That comes with the light kit. And there's several different mounting items that come with it. There's Velcro and there's different kinds of attachments for different size handlebars if you need it. This is an interesting item. This is useful for more than just your lights. This is a helmet adapter. It has a strip on the back that you can use with glue or Velcro that mounts onto the top of your helmet. And then the light, your headlight, could be mounted onto your helmet. Or you could put a tail light on the back of your helmet. They actually make special helmet lights that have both the front and back light on the same device. This could also be used to mount other things on your helmet, such as a small camera. And finally, this is a simple reflector. It's often overlooked on people's bicycles. When you buy a bike, it might have the reflector. It might have been removed when the seat was changed. It might have been taken off when you put on a seat bag or put on lights. But these reflectors are inexpensive. You can buy them just about everywhere, and they save lives. The United States Highway Transportation Administration has guidelines for these reflectors, and the standard bicycle reflector can be seen when it's illuminated by car headlights from several hundred yards away. So putting a small reflector like this, the red reflector, on the back of your bike can save your life. If the light burns out, the reflector will still show up when a car is approaching you from the back. So there you have it. There's a variety of lights we can use, and one of the simplest devices that can help save your life in the dark is a reflector.
I hope you enjoyed our show today. We'd like to thank Drew Godalian, who owns Wissahickon Cycles, for allowing us to visit, and Sam Ebert for being on the show. By the way, Sam no longer works for Wissahickon. Since we filmed at the shop last year, he has moved on to Caton Cycles near the Wissahickon Transit Center along the Schuylkill River Trail.
Join us again next time on Bike On, a program about bicycling in and around the great city of Philadelphia, produced by CCP-TV, the Emmy-nominated educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. Goodbye, everybody.